Hello, everyone. Okay, so we've just gone live. I'm just going to give everyone like a minute to join. If those of you that are here, if you could just do like a wave or let me know that you can hear me okay and see me okay. And if there are any problems during the stream, please feel free to shout and we will fix it up. Does happen sometimes. Perfect. I can see some waves coming in. Amazing. Okay, yeah. So, like I said, if anything cuts out during the stream, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll just ramble on. Okay, great, perfect, amazing. Loads of hellos and good stuff rolling in. Lots of people from lots of different countries, which is lovely to see. And I think we can get started. So, thank you so much for joining today. I'm incredibly excited about this webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about how the best developers grow with AI. And this is going to be split up into a few sections, some of which sections you might already know if you've been working with AI for quite a while. You'll sort of, this will go over your head. But I'll go over the agenda in a minute. And we've got some really cool stuff in here. Just before we get started, though, if we've not met before, my name is Alex. I'm technical education lead at Bitterbrains. I have about 15 to 17 years of teaching experience in web development, software engineering, and we all know that things have now rapidly changed away from writing code. So now I teach at Unlearn, which is another one of our products, and also work on content at certificates.dev, as well as the new AI certification, which we are currently working on, which I'll share more about a little bit later. Now, if you are not aware of who we are, certificates.dev, we are a certification platform, and we've certified over 8,000 developers across 600 companies, as well as individuals, and over 95 countries. We're trusted by some of the biggest companies in the world, and all of our certifications are created and reviewed by industry leaders. I was fortunate enough to review the Laravel certification. I'm a Laravel developer by trade, so that was really interesting. We are incredibly proud of the quality of our certifications, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later. If you've not already seen, we recently launched or recently announced the AI certification early access. And this is a certification which is slightly different from the traditional certifications where we certify that you're good at writing code. Instead, we want to certify that you're good at using AI. So you can go over to ai.certificates.dev to just pop your email in and get access as soon as we launch, or please go ahead and scan the QR code. Now, let's go over the agenda. I'll come back to this a little bit later. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is AI going to replace me? Which is a question that I've certainly thought about over my career, and is quite worrying for some people, but we're going to talk about that, and we're going to look at the positive aspects of AI there as well. Then we're going to take a look at what directing AI actually looks like. We'll go for a quick 5-minute break, but then we will talk about using these skills and how you direct AI, how you can transfer them skills into making yourself visible. So it's all well and good being able to work with AI, but how do you prove that? And then we're going to go into a really fun exercise where we're going to take some real AI generated code. We're going to take a look at it, and we are going to work out what is wrong with it. And I'm going to pass that over to you to do. We will have a live Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions about anything you have seen during the presentation, or just any questions at all, please go ahead and let me know. And if you do have any questions during me talking, please feel free to drop them into the chat. You don't have to wait to the end. So let's get started. The question I want to start with is AI going to replace me? And really, the answer to that is no. Now, that's quite a simple answer. But the more I've thought about this, the more I realized that this is actually if two things are true. The first is that you can code. So even if AI is writing code for us, we still have to be able to review the code, but we also have to understand the systems and architecture and how code fits together. And the second thing is you know how to actually direct AI, because if you don't know how to direct AI, you use AI, but you might be slower, you might get worse output. There are tons of things that can go wrong here. So the answer to this question is no, it's not going to replace you, but you should be able to code and you should be able to direct AI and also prove that. So I'm going to hand over to the chat. If you could tell me what you think this graph is showing, I'm going to wait for a few to roll in, and then I'll go ahead and reveal this. It's a pretty scary looking graph. Okay, yeah, I've already got 3, 4 answers coming in. Stack Overflow queries is a really good answer. That's not the answer, but yeah, this is specifically US software development job postings on Indeed. Now, this is just one source, but if you look at other sources of job postings, hiring, they all sort of form this same shape. Now, the thing about this graph is, at first, it is very misleading. It looks pretty scary, but actually, if we look into this graph, it's not that bad. So first of all, we've got the overhiring bubble that happened around COVID, and these have existed, over time. So we see lots of these over time if we look at data that goes back a little bit longer. And then we have the sort of pre-pandemic level line here. So actually, when we look at this graph and we ignore this overhiring bubble, what we see is we've only seen about a 20 to 30% drop in software engineering jobs and hiring. But interestingly, even with this graph, which might seem bleak with that sort of downfall, we actually have this rebound just at the end here. So this green line represents the increase that we're seeing and still seeing happening at the moment. So another way to look at this, which is again a pretty scary stat and at first glance seems quite scary, is out of every 100 startup hires, how many of these hires are new graduates? Well, back in 2019, this was about 30, so obviously about 30%. And now it's around 6 or less, so less than 6%. So it tells us that experience is the new entry point. Companies are preferring people who are either more experienced or can prove that they know what they're talking about, even with AI. So let's take a look inside of that rebound, that green part of the graph. So we've got 71% of the increase in postings are in senior roles. And unsurprisingly, and this stat probably has increased, to be honest, and will continue to increase, 30% of the job postings mention AI in the job title. And that's only jobs that mention AI in the job title. We can reasonably assume that unless we're in a highly regulated industry, that lots of these companies are actually using AI, allowing their developers to use AI as well. So I'd imagine this figure is higher in terms of representing who is actually using AI. Now, a really good sort of projection from the data that we've got at the moment is that we're actually projected to see a 15% increase in job growth over a decade for software developers specifically. And if we compare that to all other occupations, that's only 3%. So, yeah, this sounds quite good. Now, obviously, and this is again an unsurprising stat, 84% of developers either use or plan to use AI tools, and this is up from 76% in 2024. And again, I'd imagine that this stat would continue to rise as well. And I'd imagine a lot of you here as well, if not all of you, use AI at some point. So AI isn't really replacing developers. Instead, it's replacing a kind of developer, a type of developer. And the good news is that even when you do use AI, myself included, you still get to love and enjoy the craft. In actual fact, I think it's probably more exciting now because things are shifting and it's almost like learning a new skill. And one of these skills is thinking, which I think is a really important part of working with AI. And we will talk about that a little bit more later. So we have to get good at directing AI, but then we have to prove it, which is the hard part. So we're going to go into the first section now that we've spoken about the job stuff, and we're going to talk about what directing AI actually looks like. So I've collected up several techniques here. They're not all of them, and there are lots of other ways that we can do this as well. Some of these technical, some of these not, but let's dive in and have a look. So like I just mentioned, thinking up front. As a developer, I've been a developer for about 20 years now, I like to start with code. So I like to jump in. I have a vague idea in my head of what I want to build, but I jump in and I like to start out with code. But in the last year specifically, I've had to shift my approach to problems and I've had to think more upfront about what I want before I start to not build it, but direct AI to build it. And there's an obvious reason for that. And that is because we are basically telling someone else or this thing what we want to do. We're not doing it ourselves. So the shift here is that the code is the end result of what we do in that process and not what we start with. So this is what a code first methodology, if you like, looks like when we apply this to AI. We start with the prompt, we get some code. It's not quite right, so we go ahead and prompt again. We get more code. We're a little bit closer. We prompt, we code. Maybe everything then breaks. You have probably done this before. We're essentially steering by correction here, and this wastes a huge amount of time and a huge amount of tokens as well. I've actually spent days before building with AI, sort of when I first started with AI, prompting over and over again all day. And by the end of the day, I thought, well, actually, I probably could have just done this myself. It would have saved a huge amount of time and stress. So, really, back then, there wasn't much point using AI because I was just wasting time by prompting over again. But we now have a different approach, and I think this is a really good approach, and that is a think first approach. So, we think about the problem in a lot more depth than we used to. We then spec this out in whichever form this looks like, and then we get the code. And usually this is more correct and we get the right result the first time because we've spent a lot of time thinking about it. So the thinking happens once here up front. Now, it doesn't have to be spec-driven development. I'm a massive advocate for spec-driven development, but you don't need to use spec-driven development if you don't want to. You just have to adopt this think first mindset where you think about problems rather than dive in and either write code or prompt your agent to write code. So, for example, we need to think about edge cases, security, user experience, the scope of a problem, and any trade offs as well. For really, really simple features that AI can build very, very quickly, we still need to think about all of these things because we're handing over our trust to something else to build it. So we need to retain our judgment on all of these issues. So thinking like a product owner is the new edge. That's the sort of conversion I think most developers need to go through. So the second one is ignoring the noise. So it's okay to just ship good software. You can still use AI. Now, we have this thing in the development community in general. This has always been the case. It's not just because of AI, but we have this month, you must do this, do this. And in this case, we've got things like run an agent swarm, switch models weekly, seem to be getting new ones constantly, which is great, but we don't need to constantly switch over if we're happy. Adopt 47 new tools, review code, don't review your code, use loops. You've probably seen all of this before. And the good thing is that you're allowed to ignore most of this. Fundamentals and actually shipping things beat novelty. So the filter that I've used for it, like in my career for a long time before AI even wrote a single line of code for us, is does it solve a problem I actually have right now? And if yes, it potentially will solve a problem, then I will try it that week. Otherwise, I'll skip it guilt free. And usually, my problem, if I've ignored it for long enough, will get so painful that I have to adopt some software. And that usually feels like the right time for me. And I do exactly the same thing with AI as well. I focus on my fundamental workflow and I get them foundations right before I start to add on all the cool stuff that we see over social media. The third thing is learning AI's habits. So this is the more technical section, which some of you may have already been doing, but let's go through this. The good thing about the mistakes that agents make when we're building stuff is these mistakes are usually very, very predictable. It's kind of like when you see AI generated text and you notice that it's been generated by AI. The longer you work with AI for writing code, the more you will notice that it does very specific things over and over again. So you'll see things like this over and over again. The agent finishes and it's called a method called get full name on user. And that method doesn't exist. It's either hallucinated or if you're using a third party package, it's looked up some old documentation for it and that method no longer exists if it's deprecated. It will say you're absolutely right, even if you weren't right and you were trying to direct it in a certain way, it will agree with you. And also vice versa. We've all seen where we are right and the thing isn't right, or the agent isn't right. You ask for like a button or a really simple task and it adds a factory, an interface and a config layer. This is a really this is a silly example, but you get what I mean. We ask for something simple and AI just wants to add a little bit more complexity to it. It will fix things by deleting them. And it will again hallucinate that things work really well, even if it's taking screenshots in the browser and reporting back that things work really well, even if they do not. So what we want to do and get into the habit of doing with AI is correcting the system, not the output. Because when we correct a system, we can add those things that we're correcting back into our toolkit. And that forms that kind of system that we can then show someone or use to prove that we know how to work with AI properly. So the first thing that we do is notice that something goes wrong. There's no real hard and fast rule with this, but we want to notice that it's not done something quite right or it's done something completely wrong. And we obviously want to correct it. So we do want to actually fix the problem up. The most important part of this stage, which a lot of people miss, is encoding this knowledge back into what you're doing. So you want to basically create a loop where you're noticing, correcting, and then making sure it doesn't happen again, essentially. So how do we encode learnings back into our workflow? One way to do this, and I'm sure 99% of you will know what this is, but it's using agents.md. This is the first port of call that I use to fix issues up that keep happening again. The rule that I have is that if something goes wrong, I first add it to agents.md and then I monitor this. And if it goes wrong again, then I use some other techniques, which we'll talk about. But everything here is a correction that you hopefully only need to make once. And there are agents.md's files that I have and I transfer across projects because I know that agents make the same mistakes over and over again. So I just transfer them over. The other thing is skills. Using skills or building up your own skills. For example, code review skills are pretty popular. Zombie skills, which I really love, which generate out a list of tests that will break an app before your users get the chance to. Warm, which is another skill that I love to use. This vets a new dependency to make sure it's worth it, alive, right-sized, and maintained. So it gives you basically a checklist of should you pull this dependency into your project. And something like a pre-flight skill, which will basically just check everything in a branch and give you a list of things that you need before you push to production or as you push to production. So that could include things like if you've if your agent has built up a queue system for something, it will tell you, well, you need to enable queues now. Find this stuff really, really useful to get that a little bit faster. And you can build your own skills, of course, but you can use others. The other thing is rules and gates. So it's great having all of these processes in place. But for example, if you have an agents.md instruction that says, don't commit debug code or secrets, first of all, you might not be using your agent to commit this stuff. But second of all, it could ignore it. Agents.md isn't the solution for everything. So what I like to do is use rules that enforce things and block things. So pre-commit, for example, I actually use a skill which checks for things like if I've dumped something out in some code, anything like that, and it will stop me from actually committing this code. Same thing for like secrets, anything like that as well. So these are like harder to be forgotten, and these sort of solidify your workflow. The other thing which I think is incredibly underrated is linting, but using advanced linting. So off the shelf linters will, give you some really basic instructions like no unused variables, don't use console log, formatting, import order, all that kind of stuff. And this captures a very small amount of like sloppy AI output. But if you build up advanced linting rules, you can basically architect your system to, as your AI agent is generating code, fix things up, enforce these rules. And these are your design decisions. And of course, you can take these across from projects as well. Now you have pre-made rules for linters, so you can go ahead and just pull things in. But to be honest, most of the time, if I have a really tricky thing that keeps happening with AI, I just go ahead and ask my agent to build the advanced linting rule. Sounds a little bit counterintuitive, asking the thing that's getting it wrong to build something to check if it's doing something wrong. But this really, really works well. And again, you don't need to write a single line of code for this. The other one is pretty straightforward and simple, and it's very similar to linting in the sense that it catches things, but this is static analysis. So essentially running your code without actually running it and analyzing this to very, very quickly get feedback for if something is not quite right. So if a method isn't being used, if the conventions are broken here, if there's a parameter that's wrong, or if you have like an unhandled null value. There are tons of things that static analysis can help with. So I make sure that I have all of these things on every single project. And not just that, I have a toolkit that I can transfer across projects, but I can also give to people as well to say, look what I can do. Now, if you get 1% better at directing AI every single day, you're basically going to learn to direct AI really, really well. It's one of them things that compound over time. You don't want to have to put a toolkit together to try and prove yourself or, do anything to try and prove yourself immediately. This is something that takes a little bit of time. Okay, so the last thing around directing AI is treating your workflow like a product. So it used to be really easy to, give someone some code and prove that you could do something. So, of course, you would give over your GitHub profile. You would do like a pull request walkthrough. You'd even do some code on a whiteboard. I don't know if that actually happens anymore. But basically, links like this to code showed how good you were. Before AI could write code, we could reasonably assume that you had done what you were giving away. But now it's much harder to prove yourself with just a workflow. It's like, yes, I can direct AI. I have all the tools in place, but how do I prove that? We are, of course, going to talk about that in the next section. So, what I'd recommend you do is start to think about putting the care that you used to give to code, and you can still give care to code, of course. Like if you love code like I do, you still want to make sure that it looks good, but that's kind of the point as well. You want a workflow that helps you produce code that you're proud of, but you also want to put care into your workflow so you have this system that just works. So if someone sits you down and says, build this app with AI, let's say, in an interview, or, you're applying for a company and you're doing a test or something like that, or you're even just trying to prove yourself. We have all of these things like thinking up front, being able to build a spec, ignoring tools that we don't need so you don't slow yourself down, understanding all the bad patterns of AI, all of the stuff that we've spoken about. How do you prove this? Well, we're going to talk about that in the next section. First of all, we're going to go for like a 5-minute break. Just grab a drink. I'll be back in exactly 5 minutes, and we'll take everything that we've just looked at and talk about how we can use this to make ourselves visible as developers with AI. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Just again, if you could just let me know that you can hear me okay, and we will get started for the next welcome back, section. Everyone. Just in Perfect. Okay, let's get started then. So, making yourself visible. Hopefully, the last section was useful if you have just started getting used to AI, if you've been thinking about using it a lot more. The question is now, if we take AI and we are, let's say, using it just 100% of the time to generate 100% of our code, how do we prove that we are still good? Now, of course, you can do that if you are a senior developer. Makes sense. You've got a long history. But what happens if you are really good at using AI? You can use AI. You know what you're doing, but you have absolutely nothing to prove that you can do that. And that's what this section and really what the webinar is all about. So people can't purely judge thinking. They can't judge your thinking and how you work. So you need to leave evidence. Evidence is the best way to prove that you can do something. That sort of goes without saying. And so we've got 5 things here, and there are more, but there are 5 things here that I think are the most important, essential things that you can do to prove yourself. So let's say that we put up a pull request to GitHub, either our own pull request. It doesn't need to be within our organization. It can be your own project. Doesn't really matter. Your code no longer really shows how good you are. So you need another way to show. So it's increasingly AI written. Like I said, let's assume that we're 100% using AI to write 100% of our code. It's going to look like everyone else's. So the description of how you arrived at that solution, the things that you did to arrive at that solution, what you thought about, what didn't work, what did work, all of this kind of stuff, only you can explain because you are the one directing this. So let's say, and I'm not a massive fan of pull requests that are automated. In terms of the descriptions. So I don't really like AI summaries in pull requests just because they tend to be very long. They tend to not describe exactly what I'm talking about, like what is actually happening here. They give very factual information. There's nothing wrong with using them and tweaking them. But what I prefer is pretending that AI doesn't exist and using this as if you wrote the code, because at the end of the day, you did direct this. So this shows the thinking, and really only you could write this because you are the one sat in front of the machine actually directing it. So the second thing is sharing how. So just on the pull request thing, like I said, if you're doing this on your own projects and no one is ever going to see this stuff, that's absolutely fine. Think of it like writing up little mini blog posts of each pull request that you do, or even each commit that you make. If you're not using pull requests, that's fine. The point is thinking about what you did and how you actually get that across to people. So the next section is sharing how. So once you've got into the habit of being able to think about what you've done and why you've done it, then you can go ahead and share it with people. And seeing someone direct AI really, really well is still really rare. And there are 3 ways that you can start doing this. First of all, just screen record a session of you building something. And again, you don't need to share this with anyone immediately. You can just get into the habit of explaining why you are doing something. Even if these screencasts never see the light of day, at least you're going through and you are thinking about the process, which again, you can use later on to prove that you can direct AI really well. Just demo to a team or to a couple of other developers or one other developer you work with how you built something. So basically do this, but within a team setting. And then you get that feedback and you get questions of, but why? How did you do this? What tools did you use? And this helps you sort of think about your process. Write up a project post-mortem. So what worked, what didn't. So these are like the pull requests, but on a lot larger scale. So you could think about these being blog posts or something like that. And the good thing about this kind of stuff is, and to be clear, I'm not advocating getting to the point and using, say, a public blog post or a conference talk as the end goal to prove that you're good at AI. You do not need to get to the stage where you're publishing blog posts in public, doing conference talks. You really just need to get to the point where you could do these things because you have enough information to do these things, but you don't actually have to do them. The point is you have to think about why you're doing things and get used to explaining what you're doing rather than just sitting down, building some software and walking away, or having your agent build software. So you can point this at a bigger audience. Blog posts are pretty simple to write. I'd recommend not using AI to write these, just because you want to add a human touch to these. But the review comments, so commenting on things like the pull requests and doing team demos and using this stuff for yourself is a really good way to potentially be able to write a blog post, to do a conference talk, but have that knowledge ready to go. The other thing is building things that others use. So a skill, for example, lots of people build skills. There are tons of skills out there. Even if no one uses them, it's a good skill to be able to build a skill with AI and direct it. A template, something as simple as, well, when we are creating out a pull request, what structure should this follow? This isn't something that we should automate with AI, as I said before, but a PR description template that everyone can fill in based on, so everyone's on board with how AI did something and how everyone can steer AI as well. A checklist as well. So just publishing a checklist that helps other people understand the process that to go through. So pretty much like taking a checklist, like the examples I gave earlier of all of the things that you can do to guide AI, you could turn that into a checklist for yourself or for your team. Or even something a little bit more advanced, like an MCP server within your company or the product that you're building. So you have everyone being able to plug into your internal systems. And there are loads more things here that you can do. These are just some examples, but the point is you want something that you can either show someone else or you can give away to someone else. And the good thing about these is that every time someone uses one of these things, it has their name on it. So 4 out of 5 is get certified. So employers really do shortlist on certifications, but the problem is now anyone can claim AI skills. The proof of this is what stands out. So you could walk into an interview or you could approach a client and say, well, I'm really great with AI. You could have a portfolio that you might not have written with AI, but could have been written with AI, or just CV keywords saying that you can work with AI. And these are really cheap to say and also really easy to fake as well. But when you have a certificate, you can prove that you're capable of building with AI. Now, saying that, what makes an exam or a certificate worth actually trusting? And this is the important part. There are lots of ways to obtain certificates, but they're not all built equal. The first one is it really should be written and designed by industry experts, people who actually know what they're talking about, not just built to give you a certificate. The second thing is you should have a committee around a certificate that who know what they're talking about. So people who can review this and help shape the exams, whatever that looks like. It should also be really, really well proctored. So it should be nearly impossible to cheat. The minute that a certificate is easy to cheat on, the minute it becomes worthless. So having it heavily proctored is makes it trustworthy. It should also be built for real world work. So it should be up to date. It should be practical. So there should be not just multiple choice questions, but also an actual thing that you can work on, that you can prompt you if it's an AI certificate, or things that you can type code in if it is a just a standard certificate on a framework or a language. And it should also be designed to push you as well. It shouldn't be easy because then again, it loses some trustworthiness. If you have a certificate that makes you really think that you can just about do, that also increases your knowledge at the same time as certifying you, that's a really good signal. Next up, is owning one topic. Now, again, this doesn't need to be a public thing. It could be you just being really interested in one topic and or writing blog posts about that, or being the person in your company who is known for a certain thing within AI. So, one question, and someone mentioned his name earlier. If you could just put in the chat who you think of when I mention agent skills. There's a little bit of a delay on my end, so I'll just wait for the chat to roll in. So who do you think of when I mention agent skills? Okay, so someone said Matt, which I guess proves my point even further. Just using the one name, Matt. Yeah, Matt Pocock. So some of you have probably used Matt Pocock's skills already. His repository of this is huge, and he is known for being the person who's really good at building AI skills. Now that's great for Matt, but for us, that's a lot harder because we don't have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media, or at least I don't think we do. I certainly don't. But like I said, you can be known or just take an interest in a specific thing just for the fun of it. Or you could be the person within your company who's the go-to person for certain things. Or you could just build up a blog or a site based on this kind of stuff. So you can pick your niche. So this could be absolutely anything, of course, something that you're really interested in, something that you're good at. And I'll be honest with you, this makes you stand out really, really well because you can say, well, I'm really good at using AI to refactor legacy code, for example. You basically want to become the answer to who is good at this, whichever platform this is, whether it's yourself, your company, or the internet. So this month you can do several things. I'm not telling you to do these, of course, but you could add that why to your next pull request, either on your own or within your companies. Write an actual description of the problem, how you solved it with AI. Leave some little nuggets of information within that pull request description. You could demo the workflow that you're currently using to your team, or you could just record a screencast for yourself to see how it looks. Give or publish something of yours for someone else to run. So just, give it away, publish it to GitHub if you're building a skill, write a blog post or anything like that. Or yeah, write a blog post on a topic is my other point. But yeah, just get something out there for other people to use. Or if they don't use it, it doesn't matter because by the time it comes to the point where you need to prove yourself, of course, you can go and use this. And all of this stuff outlives the code as well. Okay, we're going to go for another 5-minute break here so I can catch my breath. And then we're going to come back to the live interactive session where I'm going to put up some genuinely real code that I have had AI output over the last 2 or 3 months. And I'm going to let you decide what the problem with it is. So we're going to have a 2-minute countdown on each thing, and you can decide what is wrong with it, and then we'll compare notes at the end. So we'll go for a quick 5-minute break. We'll be back, and I'm really, really looking forward to this. So I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, we are just about ready to come back. I'll just give everyone sort of like 15, 30 seconds to rejoin. We are just about ready to come back. Give myself on like 15, 30 seconds to rejoin. Okay. Sorry, there was a bit of echo there. Okay, brilliant. So, super exciting session. Let's just talk about how this is going to work. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. We are basically going to look at some code. So this is genuinely real AI code that has been spat out from my agent over the last 2 or 3 months with various things that I've been working on. This code is mainly written in PHP, but it does not matter if you know PHP. It just so happens that's the language that I work with, and Laravel is the framework. There is some JavaScript code here as well. So this is genuine code that I have output. I've obviously chopped and changed it around for brevity, but the core point remains that it's real things that went wrong with AI. So it's basically your call as to what you think is wrong with the code. Now, some of this is subjective. There might be more than one thing wrong, but then once we're done, we're going to compare notes. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. We'll have 2 minutes per exercise for you to just shout out what you think is actually, wrong with this. And then we'll go and look at the things that I think is wrong with it. And also, more importantly, the solutions that I would use to encode this knowledge. And again, with them solutions, you can use them to prove that you actually know what you're doing. So let's get started. Round one. Okay, so I asked AI within this enrollment service. So this will basically just attach people to a team, essentially. I asked it to let participants transfer between teams. So I could add people to teams, I could remove people from teams, but I wanted them to be able to transfer from teams. And this is the code that it spat out. So I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. Please feel free to just shout out in the chat. There were no wrong answers here at all. Please just, your first thoughts, your gut feeling. I'm going to move myself here as well, so you can see this. That's not right. And I'm going to start the timer. So just to clarify, yeah, we're looking at the code and figuring out what is potentially wrong with it. Now, this example specifically is a little bit more difficult. I've probably started with the hardest example. So yeah, there are some really good answers coming in about the unenroll method, which is missing. So that's interesting, that's not the actual issue, but yeah, you're right as well. The unenroll method is in there. It's just not in the example. But we want to think a little bit more structurally. So think about how this is structured and how we're using that enrollment service rather than that missing method. Yeah, so a couple of people have got it. We're just nearly out of time, so let's take a look. Okay, great. So you are right. There are a couple of actual mistakes in here. That was probably just me, but a couple of people did get this, and I can see these rolling in. So a couple of things that people have said is lack of dependency injection. Um, Yeah, it looks overall wrong, to be honest. What is this mess? I 100% agree. I got a really, really bad output from this specific thing. This was an existing application, a really large application as well. So I think it did hallucinate on some things. We've got why is a model calling a service? Exactly. It is just architecturally a mess. Confusion about responsibilities. Yeah, pretty much all of this stuff. Now, I've just picked one thing here to talk about. We've got a stateful service built around one model instance, which is coupling the behavior to state. So there were some really, really good answers here. There are multiple issues with this. But really, the thing that we want to focus on here, and I think the person that nailed it was why are we calling a service from a model? And yeah, you're right. So really, ideally, we would have an overall service that we would then call to do what we needed, and we wouldn't do this directly within a model, passing that model into it. This was probably the hardest example that we're going to go through today because it has multiple layers to it. So I probably should have left this one for a bit later, but let's go through this and go to round two. Oh, no, sorry, we're going to talk about how this never happens again. So specifically what I put into agents.md is prefer stateless services resolved by the container and then pass models into service methods. We don't want to pass them into a constructor. We don't want to initialize something within a model. These are things that AI does all the time because they don't understand your system. The other thing that you can do is use static analysis for this. So you could build up a rule for this. And the habit here is the sort of takeaway from this is reviewing the design that AI outputs, not just the code, and figure out, you'll get a sense of what doesn't look right. Someone just said here, what's that quote again? I love this. It all looks wrong. To be honest, what is this mess? Start over. Totally agree. And I did as well. And I actually ended up using um, Fable instead of GPT instead. So round two, let's go ahead and take a look here. So here I wanted to basically output an invoice date from what is effectively an API. So in the API, this happened to be using inertia. This happened to be using Vue.js on the client side and Laravel on the back end. So we had a resource that had the issued at date, which you can see just here. And I asked it to output the date as part of what I was outputting for invoices. And it did that. And it installed Moment. It went ahead and created a computed property for this, used Moment to format the date, and then went ahead and output it in the template. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to work out what is wrong here, or not necessarily wrong, but what you think could have gone better here. So let's get started. I'm seeing some comments around computed not being pulled in as well. You can ignore that as well, just as a sort of clue. Don't worry about computed not being imported. So I've already seen some right answers come into the chat. Got about 30 seconds left, and then we'll go through this. Okay, I'm bringing myself back. We've got a few seconds. Okay, perfect. I love these answers because there are multiple right answers here. There is one glaring issue with this, and that is that the moment library is, first of all, not needed here. And also, the moment library is no longer maintained. It's not maintained, there's no active development on it. So, effectively, we've pulled in a package that we don't need. And I'll explain why we don't need it in a minute. And it's, it's not needed, and it's effectively dead as well. So the problem is that a slightly big unmaintained library for a date that never needed client-side formatting has been pulled in. The fix here is just to format it server-side. We've got a super simple app here that already has the date. Just go back again inside of the API response. Now, we don't necessarily need to replace this issued at date. We could create another formatted date on the back end, and then we've just got one thing for this. There was no real need to format this on the client side at the moment, at least, or at least for my need. So there were some really, really good answers here, but this is the main one, that a library we don't need, and that is unmaintained, has been pulled in. And a few people did get this as well, but there were some other really good answers here as well. So to fix this, again, I reach straight for agents.md. Don't add dependencies for something that the platform or framework does natively. I could probably expand on this very slightly and say, or that we could do, within the API specifically. New packages need a reason. We need to know why we need a package being pulled in. There's a skill as well that I built up. I covered this on unlearn.dev, where we run a warm check, which stands for worth it. So whether a dependency is worth pulling in, can we do it natively? Active, so is it actually maintained? Right sized, is it a suitable size? For example, are we pulling the entire Lodash library in specifically for one method? And maintained, so is it maintained securely? Is the last one, so maintained securely. We know recently there's been a lot of issues around npm packages with vulnerabilities, and that's why I built this skill up. So the other one is just to get into the habit of, say, do we need it? This doesn't just apply to packages, but this applies to code as well. Do we actually need to be doing this, or can we simplify it down, at least for now? AI loves to pull packages in, but it doesn't have the up-to-date context of whether it should actually pull these in or not. So let's go over to round three. This was a discount service that I had created, and I wanted to go back and retrospectively add a test coverage for this discount service. And this is what the agent delivered. So again, this is written in PHP, but it should be fairly obvious if you've used other testing libraries as well in other languages. So once again, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to try and figure this out. Okay, just coming back. We've got a few seconds and there are some really good answers coming in. I'm starting to get paranoid that this code is just completely wrong because there are like lots of different issues being shouted out, which is good. Like from my experience, people pick up on some really small things, which is great. So yes, lots of you got this right. This is basically a useless test, and from my experience, AI is so bad at writing tests. It tends to write tests to satisfy that the test gets green. Now, this is an extreme example, and I have no idea why my agent would do this, but I have actually seen this. This was probably a few months ago, but actually the other day, it started to pull in mocks, basically creating either these types of tests, which are useless, or tautological tests, where you're testing the tests are testing themselves. It just does not make sense. And I'm not sure if other people have had experience with this or not, but I certainly have. Now, the solution that I use to get around this, just before I go over to the next slide, because I think this is a really important point, is to use test-driven development. Prior to AI, I really hated test-driven development. It wasn't really a methodology I could get my head around. But I actually now ask my agent to build tests first and then I review them. I still don't write tests by hand. I ask my agent to do them, but at least then we can review them. Now, if we get in the habit of shifting things around like that and getting into that mindset, this test would pass previously, assuming that the discount service existed and the methods existed here. Which is a red flag if it passes without, actually having working code, which almost everyone has said. So it tests the mock, not the code. If you change the discount to 50%, it will still pass. It just doesn't make sense. It's a silly test. So the best thing to do is test the actual code, which of course you can spot this out. And someone's just said agents writing code to make tests green. I wonder where it learned that, which is an excellent point. I didn't think about that before, but yeah, you're very right. So again, so it never happens again. I sound like a broken record, but like I said a little bit earlier, I always start with agents.md. If it doesn't fix the problem, then I go a little bit deeper than that. I'd also specifically, now this is specific to the PEST testing framework, which is a PHP Laravel testing framework. I would use mutation testing. So it will catch tests where when you mutate it, it still passes, which is really good. And again, the habit to get into here is, are the tests actually testing the code or are they written to satisfy green? And like I just said, TDD really helps with this because I can just generate out 10 or 15 tests or less, or whatever I need to do. I can review them to make sure that they're actually testing the right thing, first of all, and that they actually all do fail and they're not creating tests that go green. So yeah, let's go on to round 4 here. So this one is specific to Laravel, but hopefully this kind of makes sense. Let users update their profile. I actually built this as part of a profile update section overall, but this is the specific snippet of code that came out that I caught. So again, something pretty bad. Let me go ahead and start the timer, and I will be back with you in a couple of minutes, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. So I'm going to jump in now because I've everyone's pretty much got this one. I probably should have started with this one at the start, probably the easiest one. Yeah, so there's a couple of issues with this actually. Specifically, yes, there is no validation, which is obviously terrible. I don't know what happened there, but you can imagine how dangerous that is for someone who doesn't know and understand the code, and that validation is an actual thing, even if it is server side. Now, this specific request does take all of the data from the request. Sorry, this specific update method does take all of the request data, which is bad because it's not validated, but also the fact that it's putting all data in rather than selecting the fields that it needs to actually update the profile is another issue. We get mass assignment issues, and someone did mention that as well. So pretty much everyone here has got that less than a minute in. And again, yeah, it's pretty obvious. So request all passes everything the client sends straight to the model, which doesn't make sense. And of course, the request here is to first of all validate the input, but also make sure we're only passing the data in that we actually want to store against that model. And of course, this varies from framework to framework, but I think most languages and frameworks will have most frameworks will have the concept of validation and plucking out what we need. So again, you'll be surprised to know that, yeah, I would put this in agents.md to start with. And I specifically, if you're not familiar with PHP or Laravel, that's fine. I would specifically use form requests, which is just an architectural and a structural decision that I would make that keeps that data out of the controller and in a testable form request, or an easy to test form request. And you would use request validated or request only to pluck out just the fields that you want to take in. However, for some reason, my agent decided that it didn't need to validate. I don't know why, but it also decided that it didn't really care which data I pulled in. And I've actually had the opposite of this problem as well, where it has taken less data than is needed to actually satisfy the request. It goes both ways. I would use static analysis for this because this would catch this straight away. And I would introduce a skill here, a security review skill. You could either build that up yourself or you could grab that from somewhere else. You could build it up specifically to your needs. It really depends on what you need. But the point is that you need something to catch these kind of things. Static analysis is great. Agents.md hopefully stops it from happening, but these trickle down and will stop. Okay, round 5. We're now swapping over to JavaScript. So this I have dumbed this one down. So if there's anything in here that again doesn't make sense structurally, or if it's too simplified, that's not the answer. But this is let users subscribe to a plan essentially, and it's using a function here called subscribe, taking in a user ID. We're going to assume this is on the back end. And it's going to go ahead. So yeah, assume this is on the back end, and it's going to find a user, and it's going to create a subscription for them in the database, and in between here also, sign them up for a subscription. So I'll give you 2 minutes again, and then we will figure this out. So just to be clear, I can see people talking about front end. This is assuming it's on the back end. This could be written in any language. It doesn't have to be JavaScript. It's not a specific JavaScript problem. But yeah, we're going to assume we're not doing this from the client side. Okay, so just a few more seconds here. Again, this is a really tricky one because I'm going to learn a lot from this for any future webinars. It's really hard to condense down a application of something that's been generated into a smaller snippet. Lots of people are pointing out some really good things, but the issue with this, aside from any small opinionated things or any things that don't quite look complete, is that you could submit this request twice very, very quickly, and you could create multiple subscriptions with this. AI is really bad, I found, at this. So two concurrent requests, both pass this check here, existing, and they both insert. So the user ends up with two, or can end up with two active subscriptions. So you would fix this by enforcing it with a unique constraint at the database level, and then you would catch this conflict and you would then properly return the existing row. So I've seen this in JavaScript. I've seen this in lots of different languages where we want to basically stop multiple things being created, and we need a way to handle that. That's something that's really hard to review, which is why this thing is really hard to catch, incredibly hard to catch, because we don't think, let's review this for that reason. So again, surprise, surprise, I would put this in agents.md. Specifically, I would probably add to this. Actually, this is probably an incomplete example of what I would have actually put in. I would do a general rule about concurrent requests and how we handle them. The habit, always ask, can this happen twice? I've got into the habit of doing this for absolutely everything that AI builds. Will this be a problem? Particularly things around payments, and particularly things around, like, creating accounts and all that kind of stuff. So the thing to take away, thank you so much, by the way, for all of the answers. I wasn't expecting so much feedback in the chat, but some of the answers were great. Probably some things I hadn't even thought about as well. So I really appreciate this. But the key takeaway here is that AI wrote every single one of these for me in seconds, and I'm sure you have examples you can relate with. But every call that you just made is evidence that you know how to look for things, and we got some right answers there. I could see people were really digging into these examples, and they're the kind of things that, as we discussed in the first half, you can note down as evidence, and then you can use that to show. So a couple of people asked about the book. Yes, we are giving away a book, a completely free ebook for this. So let me just get rid of myself so you can properly see everything. This is a book written specifically to guide you through proving your AI skills, totally free. Please go ahead and scan the QR code or visit this URL. And you'll just get the PDF, and you can go ahead and check it out. There's a link in the chat here, so you can go ahead and grab that. And it includes an 8-day plan as well. So if you're the kind of person that likes to do a checklist, that's great. You can go through and check off everything that you're doing. And yeah, hopefully this helps you with everything that we've covered in the webinar as well going forward. So you've got a nice handy reference to use. Okay, so we are now going to go to a Q&A. So I'm just going to switch over here to this QR code. So if you did want to grab, or if you did want to sign up, sorry, for the AI certification that we're going to be launching very soon, please go ahead and do that. We just need an email and you'll be part of the founding cohorts. You can see, or you get access to the certificate first. And this is, again, like I spoke about in the presentation, something that is incredibly important and massively helpful for you to prove your AI skills, along with everything else that we've covered. So please go ahead and scan that if you want to. But if you have any questions, I look forward to answering them. I think some are going to pop up on the screen, and they have. Okay, so how does systems be correcting itself? How to identify and confirm an AI tool? Follow it the next time and forth. I'm going to guess this is speaking about, let me just read this again. Sorry. I'm not entirely sure what this question is asking. If you've asked this question, could you please just clarify, I'm not sure whether you're talking about tools specifically or the actual system specifically. But yeah, please go ahead and rewrite this out and we'll pop it up. We'll pop it up. Okay, so how do you incorporate into your workflow staying sharp with writing code yourself without the help of AI? Super question. So I have been thinking about this. It's a really difficult question to answer because I'm an experienced developer. I've written code. I have, I could come up with a solution with actually writing code by hand very, very quickly. I'm really interested in code, but very recently I had to dive into a piece of code and adjust it myself. Now, I rarely do that because most of my code is written by hand, but I found myself actually a little bit stuck. So I feel like I'd lost my edge. I was struggling to figure out what things were doing. And that was really painful because it was really weird to see me not being able to write code and figuring out, like, what am I doing? My main advice would be always, always go in and look at the code that is being written and ask, or by your agent, and ask yourself, does this look like something I would write? Now, that serves two purposes. You actually look and you analyze the code and you link that back to what you already know so you can stay sharp with certain things that have been built. So it's mainly architecturally. Most code within frameworks, everyone writes code differently in languages and frameworks. Everyone writes code differently. So you can't really compare it to an ideal because everyone's different, but you can compare it to what you would write. You can analyze that. You get you get that instant feedback, and then you can go ahead and steer AI to make sure it continues to do that how you want it to written. Basically, in short, review your code really, really well. I'm guilty of not doing that, which is why I just said I jumped into a bit of code recently and I was like, what is going on here? I don't know how to write code anymore. So yeah, definitely review code constantly. You could even set yourself a quota of how much you do this. You don't need to review everything in super detail or you won't go quickly. But yeah, review at least, as much as you can. Can you explain how static analysis works or looks like? Okay, yeah. So this varies between languages and frameworks. There are lots of different tools. So essentially, you would install a package into your project based on the language that you're working with. And essentially, this will just be a command that runs and analyzes your code and effectively runs your code without actually running it. So it's analyzing the code as if it was running it. Now, what this will do, and the reason that this works really well in an AI workflow, is it will pick up on issues before you run tests. So yeah, it will pick up on huge problems before you run tests. It will pick up on issues before you go in and you manually QA things. And it's very, very quick. So I use PHP Stan in PHP and Laravel, and this will just very, very quickly feed back to the agent if something has gone wrong. The key part about static analysis being baked into a workflow is that you really want to make sure that you have your agent run it, either put it in your agents.md file under like a verification section. So say always run static analysis, whichever tool it is, after every change. Or you could add it into a commit, a hook. So you could add it into an agent hook. I wouldn't add it into a commit hook because then it's too late. So you could run this, ask this to run this every single time it makes a change, and then it will correct itself. And then if something's still wrong, it will correct itself. So basically you just skip the phase where something is broken. The agent will correct itself. So depending on the language or framework you're using, do a search for it and get your agent to install it with some basic rules. I saw I saw this question earlier and it made me laugh. So if these agents are so intelligent, why do we have to explain to them how to avoid making all these stupid errors that should never happen in any app? Yes, that is the reality of it. So it's kind of like a catch 22. We either don't use AI and we reject AI and we say, well, actually, I can make better decisions than AI, which I'm going to be honest is true for some of the time that we use AI. Um, or we can full on use AI and it makes these mistakes and we potentially get slower. Now, the key distinction here is I'm not going to advocate for not using AI because we're already here, we're already in the future where it is never going to go away. It's not a trend anymore. It's a solidified part of a lot of developers' workflows, as we've seen from the stats. So, what we need to do is we need to understand that AI does hallucinate. It will get things wrong. It's trained on lots of people's data, of course, and it will get things wrong. It won't understand you. You will explain wrong at some point. So it can be your fault. So what you ask for is what you get. And if you've not explained that properly, then that's your fault. So, like, you have to get good at explaining things. And this is something that, again, like I said earlier, I started out doing by just prompting. Things went wrong, prompting. I was getting more and more frustrated. Why isn't this working? Why doesn't it understand what I want? And why is it making these mistakes? So the point is that we need to get to the point where we build up these guardrails within our workflow so we can use AI and it doesn't make these mistakes, or at least we catch these mistakes early. Now, the net effect of that is positive. We do make mistakes along the way, like humans do. The AI agent makes mistakes as humans do, but we correct them quickly, and therefore we get that net positive effect of going faster. So, yeah, it is, it is weird to say, yes, they're intelligent, but they keep making mistakes, and we have to keep explaining ourselves. But we just have to train them in our own way, set the guardrails up. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I sort of touched on this earlier. How do we automate these iterations? Agent writes code, we catch problems, we add guardrails, we press go again. You've pretty much nailed it. So on every project that I start, I already have an existing, like I said, suite of tools that I always install. I have certain skills that I use as part of my workflow. And to be honest, I just transfer these over to different projects. But of course, then I tweak them per project. So it takes me a little bit of time to set these up. But this is the exact flow, if you like, that I follow. So yeah, I'll get my agent to write code. I'll notice that there's a problem. Now, if you spot a problem, don't ignore it. Like the main advice is figure out the best way to make sure this doesn't come back again. And like we looked at in the live round, I would always start with agents.md because this is the easiest way to explain a specific problem. And it's the most intelligent way to explain. So I'd add it to agents.md. If that problem comes back again, then I'd look at another solution like a advanced linting rule, which, like I said, I think is pretty underrated. You can do some very, very advanced things with linting rules to prevent basic errors. And you can basically architect your application around these surprisingly well. So yeah, I would add a guardrail. I would press go again, as you've phrased it, which is exactly what we're doing. We're essentially just trying again. The one thing I would say is that I'm a massive fan of spec-driven development, which we touched on earlier. And what this allows you to do is after you have built up these guardrails that you can transfer over to other projects, I would use spec-driven development to plan up front in the cheapest way possible how you would build something. So I'll give you an example. I use OpenSpec, which is a spec-driven development framework. So effectively, what I'll do is I'll ask my agent uh, to build out a spec, and it will use OpenSpec's tools, which are essentially a set of skill files to do this. And what it will do is part of the artifacts that it produces, as well as the spec, it will produce out a list of tasks, technical tasks that it will do. Think like create this class, add this method, architect it like this, make this decision. So that's something that you can go and you can review before before you get your agent to actually build it. And this gives you, firstly, a good idea of if you're using the correct model. So if you're using a less advanced model, you might get a worse technical list of tasks out. But overall, you would do that first, and then you would pre-see the issues that could come up, and you could correct them before they happen. But using some sort of spec-driven development, whether it's just a basic plan mode inside of Claude Code, it doesn't really matter what you do, which isn't really spec-driven development, but it's the idea of thinking, planning up front, and then letting it go with those rails in place. But this takes a while. Like, this takes a long time. You build these up over time. It's not something that you can just add to a project in one day and then get perfect output. So yeah, exactly like you've said, just catch the problem, add a guardrail, however it works for your project, press go again, and just see what happens day after day. Before you know it, you're going to build up this great set of guardrails, and you're effectively going to get to the point where you can ask your agent to build something and you can walk away. So this is a really good question. What advice do you have for less experienced devs in order to survive in the time of AI, and how to keep on learning and getting more experience? Good question. So I would focus. It's really hard to say because I'm an experienced developer. I'm not actively learning code anymore, really, because I'm focused on AI. I would say my gut instinct is dedicate, I'm going to say 50-50. It might change, but I would dedicate 50% of your time to learning not just code. I would sort of kind of ignore code, and I would go for the architectural stuff, how databases work, how different like scaffolding and methodologies work within software engineering. Learn those fundamentals and how all of that nitty gritty stuff works, rather than how to, write some code that does a specific thing. Instead of thinking line by line, think a bit broader. So I'd spend like 50% of your time doing that, watching courses that teach those kind of fundamental things, rather than here's an app. There are loads of courses that are like, let's build this thing line by line. And I don't think most people watch them anymore. I have experience creating courses, and no one really watches them anymore. So I would focus on them fundamentals 50% of the time. The other 50% of the time, focus on using AI to direct and build what you've already learned. So you'll be able to recognize what you've learned in that other 50%, and then you can go and just basically match them up. So you'll get to the point where you can prompt an agent to do something or build something out with a spec, and you will recognize exactly what it's done, and you'll get a gut feeling as to whether it feels right or not. That's not to say you shouldn't learn code line by line and specific things that languages and frameworks do. You can do that as well. But I would dedicate much less time to that, and I would focus on the engineering fundamentals over anything. Okay, so a very similar question. As a junior, I don't have the experience yet to call out problems in AI written code. What's your advice on how to incorporate AI into the workflow as a junior? So yeah, again, it sounds like from what you're saying that you're more interested in using AI first, which I totally get because you want to move really quickly, and I totally understand that. So I would, yes, use AI to generate code, but I would do exactly what I just said from the last great question, which is dedicate 50% of your time to learning the fundamentals. If you learn those fundamentals, you will understand what the code does, even if you don't recognize the actual syntax. So you can learn the syntax, but I think it's really important to focus on those fundamentals. So very similar question, but if you want to follow up on that and ask anything for specific, please feel free. Um, I've just spotted a comment from the last question. Sorry, so I just want to address this because I'd forgotten about this, and that is it's from Janice, which is learning using AI, which is again a really great way to do things. So for the last two questions actually that I just answered, yes, definitely build something with AI and ask it to explain what is happening. So use the capabilities of AI to explain. Now, I would always go ahead and ask AI to explain, like the explain like I'm five thing, explain it like you're a 5-year old, so you can very quickly see what's happening. Like I do this a lot with things as well. I just say, explain this like I'm five, and it will go ahead and do it for me. So yeah, really, really good point there from Janice. Like use AI to learn as well. But yeah, definitely focus on them fundamentals. Okay, so can you share a brief workflow from product requirement to production with human gates and AI steps? I can't right now, but I can give you an idea I've sort of already done this, but I'll give you an idea of how I work. So when I'm starting a new project, I will first of all obviously do what any other developer would do, and I would pick the language and framework. And I would start with spec-driven development. So you said product requirement, that immediately screams to me like you've possibly got stakeholders that would come in and review what needed to be done, what didn't need to be done, what's out of scope, all of the sort of boring stuff that we usually write by hand. Spec-driven development is a really good way to do this. So you could essentially go in and you could start to build out specs that are artifacts that are shareable with other people. You usually get a spec which is shareable for non-technical people, so you could just go ahead and share that, and you could say, does this look right? Does it cover everything that we need to cover in this product? So once you've gone from that requirement, I would personally, if you had a big project to build, I would start to build this up really, really slowly. Now, the reason I would start to build this up really, really slowly is I would take a small part, or I want to say MVP, but I kind of don't, because when I say minimum viable product, it makes it sound like it's potentially a buggy, messy product. But I would start with the most essential feature. I would split this up into multiple specs. So the reason that I would do that, and I've done this on almost every project I've worked in, even if it's an existing product, I would go ahead and I would implement this slowly, step by step, because that allows you to then step in, review which direction it's going, review if it's not quite right. Then you can start to add the guardrails, similar to the question that we had earlier, that cycle. You would add the guardrails, you would ramp it up, you'd add the next feature, you'd add the next feature. By the time you get to this point, if you've specifically used spec-driven development, your agent is going to know exactly which way this project is heading. It knows exactly what to do. It knows the decisions that have been made in the past. And you have all the guardrails in place that we've spoken about in here, and there might be others that you add. So they're generally the steps that I would follow. And yeah, you end up, it feels really slow at first. It feels like you're spending like 80% of the time thinking about things, which you probably are. But eventually, you're in this really good position where you've invested the time to build up a project from a spec, and you get really good results from it. So over time, does the agent improve as we correct it? I mean, does it pick up on how the developer thinks? Um, Not really. So I'm going to guess you are possibly new to using agents, and the way that they generally work is that there are some memory things. So there are like there's memory functionality of command line agents. Um, I tend to find they don't work that well. So at least not at the moment. So for your question, I'm going to relate this back to say issues or things or ways that you think as a developer that things should be done. That's something that you can put into agents.md, and that's why this exists, to create that sort of memory of how you want things to work. But specifically, an agent won't improve similar to like ChatGPT understands you over time and knows all of your preferences. It doesn't really do that very well. To be honest with you, even if it did do that, I wouldn't be comfortable with it, because I would want some way to encode that knowledge into one single place that I could share with the rest of my team. So even if it did do this, I would say probably don't rely on it. Can I use AI agents in a simple project without adding more complexity? Um, Yes, you absolutely can. If by complexity you mean um, all of these guardrails and rules and like hooks and stuff like that, yes, you can. There have been plenty of times, particularly when I first started to understand AI and how it could help me as a developer a lot better, I would go in and just use it to just generate out snippets of code. I wouldn't ask an agent to go in and, loop over a problem and try to figure out something over a long period of time. So yeah, you absolutely can dip in, use things to speed you up. And actually, I'd probably recommend that. I wouldn't recommend going in sort of all guns blazing, trying to get everything done in one go. Yeah, definitely dive in, see how it can help you. If it speeds you up 10%, that's great. Like, you don't have to use, as I said in the webinar, you don't have to use all these shiny tools and add complexity. You can definitely dip in and see if it can help you with specific issues, or, just speed you up a little bit. What standard do you hold the generated code to? For example, do you stay at an architectural level, or is your standard, is this how I would write this? This is hard to direct AI at this level, right? Yeah, so I do the latter. I do the full, like, I want this to look like I have written the code. And most of the time I do get success of this, but like I said, it takes time to get to that point. Like, it really takes time, and it's pretty boring, I'm going to be honest with you. There are plenty of times where I've generated a piece of code and it's, for example, not used a form request within Laravel, which is the framework that I generally work with, which is essentially a way of taking the data from a request that you want and encapsulating it into a class. I much prefer this architecturally, but on a sort of single line code example, if I see something like a ternary, for example, broken up into multiple lines, I hate that. For me, that's a linting rule, so these things take so long to build up. But luckily, I'm at the point, through a lot of hard work actually, where most of the time, and I know lots of people say this and they don't mean it, but most of the time I can ask my agent to build something, and I can walk away and get a coffee, and I can come back and it's built it 99% perfectly of how I would have done it myself. But like I said, that takes a lot of time and effort to build up. I'm thankful enough that I can teach these things to other people. And I also recognize that these are very personal. Some people will have different standards, so it is incredibly hard to teach. But it's one of them things that if you do over and over again, you look back and go, "Wow, look how far I've come." So, but yeah, it's very hard to do. You're right; it's very hard to direct AI at this level. But if you micromanage it, but then encode them skills back in, you will be like superhuman. Does it happen in with AI agents, context sensitive per chat tab, meaning it couldn't recall past learnings? Um, okay, so I'm missing some context here, but I'm guessing what you mean is so when you start up a new agent, obviously it loses context of what it's done. Um, I wouldn't say employing skills specifically helps here. There are a couple of techniques, some specific to the agents that you use and some specific to methodologies that you can use. I'm going to give you three examples right now of how I make sure that when I pick a project back up, it understands where I left off. So the first one, and the simplest one, is using like a continue feature of an agent. So for example, you would launch Claude with continue the last conversation. It would pick up all of the context. Bear in mind, you have a context window for all agents. So for example, a 1 million, 2 million token context. So eventually it will have to compress this context over and over again. So you can keep using a continue flag within Claude Code, but eventually it will water down the context within that session to the point where it forgets things or it like hallucinates on things. So it's not perfect. Context windows are always growing. So we are going to get to the point where eventually we're going to have these huge long running projects where it remembers everything perfectly. So I don't rely on that specifically. What I do instead, and here's the second one up, I use a very simple markdown file. So I was recently working on a piece of code and I was typing away in Claude Code, and I just happened to not be using spec-driven development because it was on a project that spec-driven development wasn't set up for. But I was typing away, like, this needs to be done, this needs to be done. And then I needed to step away from my computer for whatever reason. It could have been the end of the day. I can't remember. So what I would do is I would say, please, can you dump everything that we've discussed, every decision that I've made into a markdown file? And please just like make it as simple as possible. So it would do that. And then the next day I can say, well, actually, even if, let's imagine context didn't exist, I can go, look at this file, please, and let's pick up here. The third thing, and another level up, is sort of spec-driven development of the decisions that you've made along the way. You have deltas of things that have changed. You'll have all of the decisions that you've made on a project, technical decisions, business decisions, everything all encoded into these specs, and your agent will understand the project as time goes by. So there are lots of different ways that you can do this. There's probably going to be better ways in the future. Again, agent memory might get better. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question. I was missing a bit of context, but if not, let me know. What do you think about the case of using local OpenAI models versus cloud-based ones, considering both the quality of code generated and the cost, now that the subs tend to get more expensive? Yeah, so there's a big shift at the moment to a multi-model approach to software engineering with AI. Yes, cloud-based models are incredibly expensive. We're locked into them, which is the issue. So we're so reliant on cloud-based services with huge amounts of inference power. So effectively we are going to get to the point where the prices go up, or we don't get access to the latest models unless we pay more. All of these things that are potentially put in place. Now, personally, I don't have a lot of experience running local models or models on my own hardware. But I definitely think we're never going to get to the point ever where we own our models completely. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we will get to the point where it's more possible, but the massive amount of power and influence that we have in cloud-based stuff is always going to outweigh that. Like, it's always going to, even if we get the best hardware. So yeah, I think it's great to experiment with them. They're good for very specific things, but I can't see a future where we don't rely on cloud providers. Unfortunately, I might be wrong, but that's just how I can see things going at the moment. How do you organize ownage of specs in a big monorepo several developers work on? Good question. So I don't have a lot of experience working with spec-driven development on big projects over multiple developers. But the great thing about frameworks like OpenSpec, SpecKit, is they can be broken up into domains. And also, by their very nature, they are committed to GitHub. So I've had this question before, actually, or someone sort of alluded to the fact. Oh no, they didn't. I was at a conference. Someone said we have a massive team. How do I break up the specs? So they wanted to start using spec-driven development. How do we start? Well, it's kind of like asking, how do we separate code that's committed to GitHub? If you think about it, because specs are technically just written plans for things that are folded into your source control like code. So you can break these up by domains. I don't think that's actually completely necessary. From what I've seen, a lot of huge organizations use GitHub SpecKit, and I think they just use it as it's intended. They create a proposal. The proposal is generated. The artifacts are generated. That goes up to GitHub or wherever they're hosting a project, and it just folds in like everything else. And then you have this history over time. So think of it of like lots of different developers working on a project. They all are getting the benefit of the prior specs, the deltas that have been generated already. But yeah, I treat it just like that until you probably get to the point where it's really hard to manage. And then I would sort of say, well, how can we tidy this up? But as far as I know, lots of developers, lots of companies who have big monorepos, big companies, they just use the framework as they're intended. How do you recommend sharing agent files between repos? Oh, really, really good question. So there's not really a tried and tested way to do this. I would. Oh, that's a really good question, actually. Yeah, because it's not like something that you can just install or pull down. I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you. That's something that I will go ahead and look up. Great question. And I'm going to do some research on that because I've never thought about that before. So sorry, I couldn't answer your question. Okay, so when creating a new module, do you prefer asking the AI to generate the entire thing at once, or do you build it iteratively in parts? Fantastic question. Most of the time in parts. So I typically start with if it's an existing product and I have an existing code base, which I don't know much about, which, let's face it, no one dives into code and looks at every section of the code before they start working on. You sort of get a sense. As a developer, you get a sense of a product as you start to build features, right? So I take it back to like prior AI days where I would dive in, I would have a look at the relevant parts of the code, and then I would start to build it. So to give you an example, you would jump into a product, you would ask your AI agent, if you were to build this right now, what would you do? And generally, you will get out a really good answer of what it would typically do. Or, of course, you can use spec-driven development, or you don't have to. You could use plan mode. If the plan looks uncomfortably big, then I would start to think about breaking it up into different phases. Also, if the existing product is a legacy product, I'd say yes, break it up into phases. If it doesn't have sufficient test coverage, break it up into phases. What I'm trying to say is use the context surrounding the project you're working on to make a decision. So if it makes you feel uncomfortable, and if it makes you feel like, wow, this is going to be really difficult to review this, then I would break it up into iterations. And you can actually ask your agent to break it up into the phases that it needs, and ideally ask it to break it up into safe deployable phases which you can put behind a feature flag. That's another thing that I'd recommend doing when you're a little bit unsure about something that you're adding to a product. So yeah, take the context around the product, ask your AI agent what it would do before it does it, or just do a dry run if you don't mind wasting tokens, and then decide from there based on the test suite and everything that the product, if it feels safe or not, and then break it up into phases that you can deploy, ideally behind a feature flag. What do you think about Cursor versus Codex versus Claude? Okay, so I started out my development journey with AI. So like I classed the journey that I had as starting completely fresh as a new developer when I first started working with AI, because it was such a mindset shift. I started out where I felt more comfortable, and that was within an IDE. So I started with Cursor. I gradually found that I preferred to be on the command line. I saw lots of people using Claude Code. And actually, I completely scrapped an IDE altogether, really. I do review code. I use PHP Storm, but I very rarely open it. So my workflow, as I explained earlier, feels so good to me now. It's probably not the most perfect workflow, but it feels great for the work I'm doing. So now I look at the output and I review the code very rarely because I have such great output from my agents now. So I switched to Claude Code. I started out with plan mode in Claude Code because it felt the philosophy shift of having to plan was good, and I could actually see what it was going to do. And now actually I have two subscriptions. I have one to Claude and I have one to Codex. So I started using Codex to in fact, I'm not gonna lie, I use them both to basically argue with each other. So if I'm implementing something with Claude, I might feel that something's a little bit wrong, or models have bad days where they don't, it feels like they're not outputting properly. I'll switch over to Codex to do a code review. And actually, sometimes Codex will say, this is just, I wouldn't do it this way. I would do it this way. And actually, I think, well, actually, yeah, that's probably like a really good plan. So currently, I think Cursor's great, but I use Codex and Claude, mainly Claude Code. And I just switch between the two depending on what I'm doing and what feels right. I can't really give an explanation of which one I find better, but yeah, I just generally switch it up. Do you review all the code generated by AI with the same intensity? If not, how do you explain this to a non-dev so it doesn't sound like you are unprofessional? Um, so personally, like I said, I do review code insofar as I want to make sure that I tweak the output. So I'm basically training the project to get the output I want. So yes, I would start out with the architectural stuff, which I think is most important. So I don't review it all with the same intensity. That's purely because with architectural stuff, I find you need to put a little bit more thought into it because it's a more of a long-term thing. I can look at a line of code and immediately know that it doesn't feel right to me. So I don't, it's not really an intense review of that kind of stuff. They're more the things that I was discussing earlier, like the small things that you can just quickly add to agents.md or quickly add a like a linting rule for. So intensity for me starts at the architectural level and like what files is it creating, where is it putting these files, is it using certain patterns, is it using a pattern in one place and a different pattern in another place, because that does happen a lot. Is it respecting the existing architecture of an application? That's what I spend the most intensity on. And like you said, so it doesn't sound like you're unprofessional, I think that's probably the most professional way to approach AI development, is to look at the overall architecture of it, and the structure of it and how it's actually building things. And that's different for different people. Some people are less bothered about the architecture and less bothered about certain patterns, or they don't like certain patterns. So it's a very personal thing. But yeah, that's how I would explain it. Guide AI in terms of the long-term vision for the project architecturally, and what the code looks like. And then yeah, if you notice things that you just don't like, then you can fix them up as you go. So next question, you say to get better at architecture, how can you learn it if you're a new dev with little experience? Learning a new language is easy. There's plenty of tutorials, but learning architecture, really good point. And I agree with you. I think there are less courses on architecture and general architectural concepts, and that sort of that foundational stuff, like I said earlier, like it's really easy to watch a course of how to build XYZ and it's line by line. Let's do this. Let's do this. You end up with a great result, but actually you don't really understand the why. That's definitely something. If you can find courses that teach them deep architectural things, I can't really point you to any. I don't know of any that truly exist right now that are solving that problem. There probably are. I know that's something that we're doing over at unlearn.dev. So that is something that we will be doing because we believe in helping developers with these fundamentals, whether it's AI, architecture, or anything. So, that's something to watch out for. But yeah, in terms of how you can learn it, the other thing I'll say is it is a very much a personal preference thing. It also, again, depends on context. So if you're joining an existing organization, there will be architecture in place. There'll be certain patterns that you like, dislike. For example, like the repository pattern at one point was so popular, like everyone loved it. And it was like, you have to use the repository pattern. And then now it's probably one of the patterns that people say do not use. It's completely and utterly pointless. So it's like anything, develop your own taste in it. See what other projects are doing. So look at open source projects, hopefully not AI written like Vibe coded, and see what they do. But yeah, it's hard, but if you can get interested in the fundamentals, they're a lot more boring for most people, but yeah, I would try and focus on that. May I know what is that data? I'm not sure what that is referring to. So please pop that in the chat if you're still here, and I'll try and answer that. Isn't AI just going to get good enough that it doesn't need us? This is a difficult question, but I think we're always going to need someone to guide a system. Now, I've spoken to so many other developers about this, and um, I I came up at some point. I thought to myself, well, at some point the code isn't going to matter. Like, no one's going to care about the code. You know, we've spoken a lot in webinar, and I'm really passionate about quality code. Um, and a question that kept popping into my head is, at some point, do we really care about how good the code is? Like, if we're asking AI to build a piece of software and it builds it and it works and it looks good and it's not buggy, you know, and it's the performance is great and we can deploy it and we can ask it to update things, then is there any point to, you know, like you said, that it doesn't need us anymore to think about the code? That is a really difficult question. It's one that's still in my head. And it's, you know, this is a question I genuinely don't believe that it will replace us to that respect. I think it will get really, really good, but it's always going to need someone to steer it in the right direction. Bear in mind that AI is trained on existing code. And I think if you get into the cycle of, let's say, vibe coding slop, and then that gets, I'm going to not be technical here, I'm just going to say re-ingested into a training model to train more. Eventually we're going to get to the point where things just break down. That's my gut feeling. So I can't answer that question. Of course, I don't think anyone can answer that question. I know where you're coming from. I thought about this before. It is going to get really, really good, but I don't think it's going to get good to the point that it replaces humans. Someone's always going to need to be behind the wheel. The other point I'd like to make on that is that even if it does get really good and there are less developers employed to steer it because it is so good, companies won't accept that, because what they will want to do is they'll want to hire more people to steer more ships. We'll just use an analogy to get more output. So you'll always have the bar being raised higher and higher, and you know, companies will never fall behind. They'll always want to compete. So I don't think in terms of jobs as well, that will go down. And we've seen evidence at the moment that software engineering jobs are growing. And I'm also guessing, again, if you look at model intelligence, that is basically that we don't see as model intelligence rises, developer jobs are going down. So if we look at just the data we have available at the moment, I know it's not perfect and it's not a massive representation of what's actually happening, but if we look at the data we do have with jobs on the rise and model intelligence on the rise, they could be just a correlation, but they are both heading in the same direction. So yeah, I don't think we will get to that point. But hopefully if we do, I'll be retired by then. Okay, so I think we've got time for probably one more question. As a developer, I feel like it is not enough to all perfectly know 100%. True. There's always something that we don't know. So you need to learn at least the basics of architecture, isn't it? Yes, exactly. So like I said earlier, I've sort of fallen out of keeping up to date with my favorite framework, which is Laravel. It's a PHP framework. I don't necessarily keep up to date with the changes anymore. I used to be really interested in looking at snippets of code on X, and I'd love to sort of dive into the nitty gritty. I don't do that much anymore. I still enjoy my craft and I still learn as I need to, but it's all AI directed. And like I said earlier as well, with architecture, I think if you can direct AI to build a well architected system, which also, things don't go wrong. So that's also sort of part of architecture as well, making sure that things are in place. Setting up guardrails, I think, is equally as important. But yeah, I would say, yeah, you're never going to know 100% of a language. You're never going to know 100% of a framework. There's no point doing that because we find that information as we get to it. So yes, focus on architecture and then go down from there. Is my sort of way of thinking, but of course everyone's different. Some people prefer to look in the code. Okay, so we've got one more question. I guess we'll do one more question. What do you think developers should focus on learning over the next year? Okay, so probably the best thing I would focus on is learning how to specify the problem that you're trying to solve. Now, it sounds like that's probably the most boring answer to this, but I would focus on identifying edge cases of things that you're building, being able to describe exactly what you want, being able to review specs, whether you use spec-driven development or not, it doesn't matter. basically being able to think up front of what you want before you build it. Now, the reason I say that is because that doesn't necessarily just mean focus on the product itself and what the product should do. It also means focus on how the product should be built, how it needs to be maintained going forward. All of these decisions that we don't usually make up front when we're building things. Like I said at the start of the webinar, I'm a developer who likes to jump in and just write code out. I was that kind of developer who would just jump in and write code out. So I think we need to shift our thinking to how do we steer AI in the right direction. Most of that happens up front now. And then as we go through, that's when we start to focus on the code. So I would say focus on, specifying what you want so you can direct AI properly, whether it's like philosophical around the product or whether it's technical as well. Just get good at interacting with an agent and getting what you need to do across. And I think if you've solved that, you are 90% of the way there to being a really good developer with AI. You need to, of course, learn the technical stuff as well, which is really difficult because, like I said, workflows are incredibly hard to prove. That's what we are solving with the AI certification. But you need to be able to think so you know what to do and talk about your work as well, and you know how you steer AI. Brilliant. So, once again, thank you so much. I'm sure there are other questions as well. We're going to compile a list of these. So, I'm going to stay around for a few minutes at the end as well, and I'll try and answer some questions in the chat. But if not, please feel free to email us, and I'll have questions passed on to me. I will personally answer them. If you've got a burning question and you think I might be able to help, I'm more than happy to do that as well. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch. But I just want to say a massive thank you for everyone who's joined today. Thank you so much for listening, for your time. I know this has been long, and thank you for participating in that code challenge as well. And I really hope over at certificates.dev, we can help you prove that you know how to use AI as well. We're incredibly proud of the certificates that we have, and the AI one is in active development, and it's something that we've thought long and hard about, and we're really, really excited to get it into your hands. So yeah, again, ai.certificates.dev, or feel free to scan the QR code. So thank you so much. I am going to head off, but I'll hang around in the chat if you have any other things. And yeah, thanks again for joining, and I'll see you really soon.